Welcome back for Volume 3 of my Ninja Guiden series of combat tutorials and tips. Razor's Edge can be extremely challenging at times. The good news is, it's supposed to be. Ultimate Ninja is the highest difficulty level in the game. You didn't expect it to be a walk in the park, did you? In this guide, I will be covering some of Ryu's ninja skills and demonstrating how to use them in combat efficiently. Alongside most of his unlockable ninja skills, the weapon that we'll primarily focus on today will be his katana. We will look at some of the moves that I recommend practicing to build confidence in your skills, and then demonstrate their effectiveness during intense combat scenarios. For the stage, I've selected the second mob fight at the early part of Day 4 from the main campaign, and the difficulty level is set at Ultimate Ninja. This particular arena is a flashback battle reminiscent of a scene from Chapter 1 in Ninja Guiden 2, and Ryu is pitted against a swarm of Spider Clan ninjas. This fight can be exceptionally tough due to the overwhelming aggression from each of the enemies, as well as the amount of projectiles in the form of arrows and bombs you must be aware of during the battle. Before we jump into the good stuff, just a quick disclaimer. If you're fairly familiar with fighting games like Street Fighter or Tekken, some of the terminology that I'll be using will likely sound familiar. The combat in Razor's Edge has a feel that is very similar to these types of fighting games. So if you hear a word or phrase that you're unfamiliar with, let me know in the comments and I'd be more than happy to help explain it in more detail there. To start off, let's take a look at the upgrade menu and go over some of the combat skills which you can unlock during your playthrough. Personally, of each of these skills, I prefer to unlock the Wind Path ability as early as possible. It is an incredibly strong skill to add to your arsenal of moves due to its versatility. It can be used to escape dangerous situations, lead to airborne and on-landing combo setups. It has invincibility frames during the startup frames of the move, and you can more easily and accurately perform other powerful attacks like the Flying Swallow and Guillotine Throw while using the Wind Path ability. On top of all that, it also has the ability to stun enemies, which can make landing attacks on them do more damage and give a higher chance for limb removal. Wind Path jumps can be chained on each landing so that one leads directly into another. This does require some fairly precise timing with your inputs, so you may want to practice to build consistency. Lastly, it can be very easy to input the Wind Path jump incorrectly with your controller. Instead, you'll end up performing either a light attack or a normal jump. You'll want to be deliberate with your simultaneous jump and light attack button inputs so you can be more consistent in performing the move when you intend to. Next up, we have the Flying Swallow attack, a move that anyone who's played Ninja Guiden should be very familiar with. We don't really need to spend much time covering its usefulness. However, I do recommend building a habit of performing a wind path into a Flying Swallow. This makes the Flying Swallow a little more safe to perform and has less recovery than a standard Flying Swallow. Notice how you can chain them together using the Wind Path technique, a very handy move to keep in mind for certain enemy types. Another good practice I recommend is utilizing your Shuriken while airborne prior to performing the Flying Swallow. This can sometimes make it more difficult for the enemy to block the attack. As we've discussed in our Alchemist guide, it can be a good idea to be ready with a follow-up attack if the enemy does block your Flying Swallow. For example, firing off a shot from your bow can be effective at securing a safe place to land. There are dozens of moves which can be performed immediately after a Flying Swallow has been blocked, but you'll need to refer to the move list if you want more detail. The Guillotine Throw, as we've discussed before, is a super powerful grab and throw move that Ryu can perform on enemies. It is best utilized in arenas which have walls that Ryu can run on or jump off of. However, like in the example here, you can see that enemies may sometimes be thrown into other objects as well. Even if the enemy is not thrown into a wall or an object, they will receive significant damage, and the move itself will also stun other nearby enemies to give you a brief window of breathing and regrouping. Very similar to performing an obliteration technique, the move is a little more difficult to pull off than the menu may lead you to believe, but with enough practice, you will get the timing down for the correct controller inputs. To state it as simply as I can, you'll want to input the Wind Path jump twice in rapid succession. Enemies equipped with shields of any kind will be immune to Guillotine Throw attempts until their shield is removed. Additionally, enemies who are bloodied or delimbed are much easier to perform the move against. Keep an eye open for whiffed attacks from the enemy, since this provides the perfect opportunity to land it and do some serious damage. I personally enjoy the feeling of landing a well-timed guillotine throw and hearing them smack against the wall. Highly recommended, 10 out of 10. Four rings is a move that can be performed by rotating the left analog stick and inputting the Shuriken throw. Ryu will spin in a circle and throw his Shuriken in all directions, thereby briefly stunning nearby enemies. This move comes in handy very frequently at the ultimate ninja difficulty, especially when combined with explosive arrows. The four rings ninja skill will help to provide some much-needed breathing room whenever you find yourself getting overwhelmed by enemies. Just like all other 360 attacks, you do not have to fully rotate the analog stick to execute the move properly. You can, instead, imagine drawing the letter U with your left thumb prior to pressing the Shuriken button. If you find yourself in distress during an intense battle, a quick flick of your thumb and a Shuriken throw can give you enough space to begin your next plan of attack without having to run away like a scared little girl. And last up for our ninja skills discussion, let's talk about the counterattack and Cicada surge techniques. The counterattack is input by holding the block button and inputting either a light or heavy attack just as an enemy is about to hit you. Similarly, the Cicada surge is input by holding the block button and pressing the jump button. When timed correctly, Ryu will briefly teleport, leaving an afterimage, and depending on the input you chose to use, follow up with an attack of his own. The light counterattack is generally more safe to perform than its heavy counterattack equivalent, with the light version providing a fairly high chance for delimbing an enemy, while the heavy version will launch Ryu and his enemy into the air. While using the katana, I've found that the heavy counterattack leads to taking chip damage from the enemy more times than not. With the vast number of other options for sending an enemy into the air, the heavy counterattack is typically not worth the risk of attempting, in my opinion, and I would recommend sticking with the light counterattack option, especially while using the katana. Unlike the counterattack skill, the Cicada surge requires a bit of ninpo gauge to use, so keep this in mind. If your ninpo gauge is empty, you will be unable to perform the Cicada surge. When performed correctly though, Ryu will teleport to the opposite side of the enemy, where they will almost always be defenseless against your next chosen string of moves. A neat trick that I've found with the Cicada surge, Ryu has the ability to teleport over great distances if timed correctly against ranged attacks. But these opportunities are rare, and I am lacking gameplay footage for this video, unfortunately. It is also a great option for landing steel-on-bone attacks against chimera enemies. Personally, I find that I seldom use the Cicada surge or counterattack skills, except during a couple of different boss encounters, and I'll use the light counterattack on occasion during mob battles. There are plenty of examples of players who make incredible use of the Cicada surge, in particular as an effective option against some challenging enemy types. I highly recommend checking out players like Pennywise or Aki Lightning for some incredible examples of how to play this game with style and speed. Now let's talk a bit about the katana, Ryu's most iconic weapon, and the one that most of you are already likely familiar with. I'll go over some moves that I recommend you practice and become familiar with that will raise the fun factor for every enemy encounter or mob fight during your gameplay to the next level. The Dragon Sword is taken from Ryu at the end of Day 1, and at the beginning of Day 2, he's handed the Jinran Maru. A little later in the game, Ryu's old pal Genshin drops in to grant Ryu the use of the Blade of the Archfiend. All three of these weapons have the exact same moveset, so here we'll just stick to calling it the katana. The first move that we'll discuss is the forward light attack, also known as the windmill slash. Push your analog stick in the direction you want to attack and press the light attack button to perform the windmill slash. It is a very fast attack that has Ryu tumbling forward and swinging his sword in a downward arcing slash. This move, once mastered, can grant you access to a metric ton of fun ways to demolish your foes. It not only has a decent probability for delimbing a normal enemy, but it is Shuriken cancelable. What this means is that Ryu will be capable of attacking before the enemy even has a chance to counterattack. It can be performed instantly, either before or after a Shuriken throw. In other words, it is a move that can be used to link attack strings of cancelable moves so that you almost never have to back off the pressure of your attack against the enemy. It will take time and practice to pull this move off consistently, But once you get it, your door to much more varied and stylish attacks has started to open. Practice this move by throwing a shuriken and inputting the windmill slash. Practice going in different directions. Practice learning the timing of your hand movements and seeing how fast you can throw a shuriken. Do a windmill slash, throw a shuriken, and do another one. Repeat until you've got it down. Practice this move frequently during combat. If you're sent to the loading screen, so be it. Try again. The windmill slash is a fundamental move that can be used in many ways to keep the pressure up against an enemy. And because it is cancelable, you can use it in a ton of different ways. If you land an Azure drop, for example, you can use the windmill slash to transition to a completely new string of attacks as soon as you hit the ground, even launching into another Azure drop if you'd like to. I'm stressing the importance of this move so much because once you learn how to utilize it, other moves will start to come to you much easier, and it is a stepping stone to a lot of fun. Next up, we'll cover the forward heavy attack, otherwise known as the Azure Dragon attack. This move was covered in my Alchemist guide for its usefulness in consistently landing Azure drop attacks. While not as fundamentally important, in my opinion, as the windmill slash, the forward heavy attack should also be practiced so you can be sure that when you want to use it, you've input the move correctly with your controller. I recommend practicing this move in a similar fashion to the windmill slash by throwing a shuriken and doing the move until you can do it with fair consistency. The forward heavy attack is a much more reliable way to get Ryu into the air with an enemy than your standard light, heavy attack combo typically would. Many enemies, especially at the higher difficulty levels, will block or dodge after your first attack unless the initial hit is powerful enough to stagger them. A normal light attack is not, so you may find yourself whiffing a once very reliable light-heavy attack combo as you advance through the higher difficulty levels of the game. This can lead to a frustrating experience for players who may have never needed to understand the moves they were performing at lower difficulties or how they actually worked, because these same moves used to work almost all the time, and now, all of a sudden, they feel like they can't do anything. A very understandable reason for getting frustrated, if you ask me. Now let's quickly go over some on-landing attacks. In other words, these are moves that can be performed as soon as Ryu lands on the ground. There is an entire list of moves that can be performed in this state, but to keep things relatively short and sweet, I'm only going to show single attack moves like the spinning blade, the light attack, and the Annihilating Demon, the heavy version. I'll cover much more about the Annihilating Demon a little later on. Both the light and heavy attack can be canceled with a Shuriken throw when performed on landing. This makes them both safe and effective to use whenever Ryu comes back to the ground from either a normal or wind path jump, especially once combined with a Shuriken cancel, which will allow you to quickly dodge or block if necessary. Another very powerful on-landing technique is the 360 heavy attack, otherwise called the flying crane. This move enables Ryu to chain drop attacks one after the other. During the final frames of an Azure drop, you'll notice that Ryu leaps backwards off of the enemy he just suplexed into the ground. During this brief window of time that he is airborne, you may input the 360 heavy attack so that as soon as he lands, he performs the flying crane and launches another nearby enemy into the air. Preemptively doing a move before the character is able to physically perform it on screen is what is known as input buffering, and this is a very common technique in many types of fighting games. Similar to landing attacks, there are two very important drop attack follow-up moves that I will cover here as well. The heavy version is called the Suffering of Azure, and this move is performed very simply by pressing the heavy attack button after performing the helmet splitter, a powerful downward thrust attack that is able to pierce through any enemy's guard. The Suffering of Azure is important to perform because of its area of effect characteristics. A normal helmet splitter attack with no follow-up can leave Ryu exposed to attacks when he reaches the ground. But by hitting the heavy attack button, he will perform a powerful follow-up attack that can break through enemy guards and shields, as well as convert into steel-on-bone attacks if pointed in the right direction. If you've seen any of my playthroughs, you'll notice I use this particular attack string quite often. The next drop attack follow-up is very interesting, but first we need to discuss the light drop attack known as Falling Falcon. Like the helmet splitter, It can be performed when Ryu is airborne without an enemy that he is actively hitting with attacks. It cannot be performed during a forward leap, like the flying swallow, but instead is another useful way to return Ryu to the ground after whiffed launch attacks. If you look in the move list, the falling falcon is shown as a move ending in ellipses. This means it is a linkable move, so basically anytime Ryu performs it, he can immediately continue any number of attack strings. In this instance, since we are talking specifically about drop attack follow-ups, we'll cover a move called the Gleaming Strike. This move is performed after returning to the ground via the falling falcon attack and followed immediately by 3 consecutive light attacks. Ryu will seem to bounce off the ground and slash his katana at anything in his path. These follow-up light attacks are interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, each one is cancelable, meaning you can interrupt any of them with a Shuriken throw, a block input, or a dodge. Even more interesting, however, is that while performing the Gleaming Strike, if the third light attack hits an enemy, it can be followed up with a heavy attack input, which will launch Ryu and the enemy into the air. Ultimately, this leads into one of the most fun combos to perform in the entire game, the Divine Swallow attack. The Gleaming Strike is one of the more reliable methods of pulling off this super fun combo. And if you love the Azuna drop, well, congratulations. You can now perform the most powerful Azuna drop imaginable. If your launching attack whiffs, guess what? You may return to the ground with a falling falcon and repeat the process. Just be sure to keep in mind that you are not invulnerable to attacks during any of this. So projectile attacks, grab attacks, and devastating heavy attacks from the enemy can interrupt your fun very quickly. Use these moves with caution, but definitely use them. Before we get to the final move that I want to highlight in this particular video, I've mentioned while running attacks in Volume 1 of these video guides, and I'll briefly remind you to utilize these attacks frequently during combat. Performing these moves is not only fun, but they do a ton of damage and can lead to some fairly flashy combos as well. Do not forget about these types of attacks, and that you can perform them especially easily after firing an arrow while airborne and landing on the ground in the running state. So last, and definitely not least, we have one of the most powerful moves Ryu can perform with a katana, the Annihilating Demon attack. This move is performed most commonly as a charged heavy attack, but like I mentioned earlier in this video, it may also be performed on landing. The Annihilating Demon is Shuriken cancelable, like many of the other moves that I've gone over so far. However, because this move is so powerful, I'm leaving it for last. It has a very high chance of delimbing an enemy, and it is especially difficult for the enemy AI to read, making it very likely to bait out a steel-on-bone attack. The enemy can only guess when you're going to unleash the attack by releasing the heavy attack button, and in many cases, the default response of the AI is to go for a steel-on-bone attack against you. Not only does charging your heavy attack bait the enemy into trying to go for a steel-on-bone attack, but if you can react to their animation, aim your left analog stick towards the flashing enemy, and release the heavy attack, you have an almost guaranteed steel-on-bone counter of your own to dish back at them. This move can be buffered during animations, like during the performance of an obliteration technique, and released as soon as the animation has completed to automatically lead into another obliteration on a nearby delimbed foe. It has invincibility frames on startup. It is easily the most powerful single move that is available to you from the very beginning of the game, even with a level 1 katana. In the example you're seeing here, I am almost exclusively using the Annihilating Demon and Shuriken cancels to wipe out the entire mob. If you're a player that is running around the arena and waiting for the enemy to try and steel-on-bone attack you so you can one-shot them, let's put a stop to that style of play for good. Isn't it boring jumping and dodging around aimlessly with your fingers crossed that you'll see that red flash so you can gobble up those precious karma points? You are the most powerful ninja in the universe. Knock it off. Don't wait for the game to give you the points. Go and take them.